All right, continuing our conversation about body cavities. Remember, body cavities are just openings where organs are located. So when you were being developed, these body cavities made solid masses of tissue, and this tissue folded onto itself, creating a pocket. And so we see this layer called a serous membrane that will be surrounding some of our major organs, such as your heart. If you think about your heart, it's constantly beating and it's moving. And as it moves, it's rubbing up against things. So it kind of needs like a protective layer for that. Kind of the reason you wear socks so you don't rub a blister. So this is a picture of your heart, and you can see this double layer membrane that is surrounding your heart, which is known as a serous membrane. So you're going to be looking at the serous membrane that surrounds your heart, surrounds your lungs, and then that also surrounds your lower organs known as your peritoneum. So serous membrane, so if you want to pause this and write these things down, is just this thin double layered membrane. Inside that is going to be some serous fluid, and that's where the cavity is where the fluid is in between these two layers. And it's got an outer layer and an inner layer, and so the outer layer, the one that's going to touch the walls of the rest of the body, is going to be known as the parietal layer. So we're going to be using this word parietal for the outer layer, and visceral for the inner layer. That's the one that actually sits on top of the organ itself. So parietal and visceral. So if you can remember VP, that is from deep to superficial. So closer to the organ is the visceral, and outer is the parietal. And the space in between these two is known as the serous space, which is where the serous fluid is that we're going to see that helps to reduce friction. So because your lungs are also moving when you breathe, etc. So this is just showing an animation of if your fist were the like your heart, your organ, and if you were to push your hand through a balloon, you would have a layer that's actually touching the heart, or your hand in this case. If this would be the visceral, and then this outer one would be the parietal here, and this space in between would be where the cavity is. So again, the outer one is parietal, the one that actually touches the organ is the visceral, VP, and the space in between is actually the cavity, and that's where that serous fluid is that helps protect the organ. So let's look at a heart so you can get an idea. So we've got the heart sitting in its cavity, and I like this picture because it's got a blue line and it's got a red line. On the next slide you will have the exact picture that I've given you in your notes that you can fill out. So if you'll just pay attention here, hopefully you do recognize this is your heart. And so this layer here, because it's the outer layer that's touching the rest of the body, is known as the parietal. And it's an AL, so that means it's got to need a word behind it because this is the adjective. And so it is the parietal layer, but we're not going to put layer. We're going to be more specific. And so the serous membranes are going to be whether or not they're touching your heart or your lung, or whether they're touching the rest of your organs. And so because this is your heart, we call this the parietal pericardium. Peri means around, cardi means heart, and it's because it's a noun. So pericardium. So this is called the parietal pericardium, which is the name of that serous membrane. So this one, this red one here, because it's actually the inner one that is touching the heart, is the visceral. AL, so it needs a word after it. This is the heart, so this is the pericardium. So inner one on the heart, visceral pericardium, outer one, parietal pericardium. In between this, that is the pericardial cavity. Why do we have an AL here instead of an Well, this is a noun, so if it's the second word, it's an If it's an AL, then it has a word after it, which is cavity. And this is where that serous fluid is located in between to help you. So that's the layers of serous membranes that protect our heart. And so if you want to pause the video here, this is the actual thing that's in your notes that I got for you. So here's the one that's touching the heart, the visceral pericardium. The outer one is the parietal pericardium, and there is that pericardial cavity, which is that space in between. Pericardium is the noun that we use for the membrane that is surrounding the heart. Okay, so not too bad. You just got to remember which one's which: visceral pericardia, visceral parietal, and then the heart word is pericardium. Peri mean around, cardi heart, because it's a noun. All right, let's look at your lungs then. So let's go ahead and just label visceral and parietal. This is the outer one. So this one is going to be the parietal. We're not going to leave it there. We're going to put another word behind it. And this is the inner one. So this is the visceral. Now, the word for the lung, and when it's at the second, it's a noun, is called pleura. I'm sorry about that, but that's just what. So parietal pleura, visceral pleura. It's not an like the heart. And then this space, we've already learned the cavity is known as the pleural cavity. Plural, not as in lots of, but, and that is where that fluid is in that space there, lining that cavity. So here we go. This is the picture that's in your notes. This inner one is the visceral pleural. The outer one is the parietal pleura, and that space in between is the pleural cavity. Pleura is the noun that we use for the membrane that is surrounding that serous membrane. Membrane, just a double-layered tissue. And then you have the peritoneum. So the rest of your body in your abdominal section is known as the peritoneum. So you can look on this picture. I'm not going to ask about this, but the ones that are on the out are called the parietal peritoneum. The ones that are actually touching the organ are the visceral peritoneum. I just like to know that peritoneum is in your abdominal area, and that is the name of that serous membrane. And then we will be looking at the rat, and when we look at the rat, you're going to see a lot of this serous membrane, and we call it mesentery. You're going to see that it's going to be what's going to hold all of your small intestines, etc., together. So this is a term that we will be using when we dissect the rat, mesentery. So let's answer this question real quick and see if we can do this. This is the membrane on the surface of the lung, so it's lung, so we know it's not the pericardia because that means heart, right? And it's on the surface, which means it's actually touching the lung, and so the one that's actually touching the lung is the visceral pleura. All right, that's all for this video.